What happens when your husband admits he only married you because you wore heavy makeup on every date? We're at dinner for our 8th anniversary, and he's 2 glasses of wine in, getting all sentimental. It's a nice place, the kind with cloth napkins and candles that actually smell like something instead of just smoke. He grabs my hand across the table and says, "Babe, I gotta be honest with you. I fell for you that first night because you looked so put together. The makeup, the whole look. I knew right then you were wife material." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He does this thing where he gets sappy after wine and says stuff that sounds like it's from a movie. But he kept going, said something about how women who take that much care with their appearance take that much care with everything else. Marriage, relationships, all of it. Said his buddy Dave told him back then, that's a woman who's going somewhere, and he believed it. I just sat there smiling politely, because our first date was not that night. He's talking about a work happy hour, 3 weeks after we actually met. He doesn't even remember our real first date, which was a Tuesday. I was coming straight from a 12-hour ER shift. No makeup, hair thrown in a bun, scrubs still smelling like hospital and hand sanitizer. I hadn't even gone home first. I remember my feet were killing me, and I just wanted coffee before I passed out on the drive home. He was the one who came up to me at that little coffee shop on 5th and said I looked like I'd had a day, then bought my coffee before I could even open my wallet. We sat there for 2 hours. He made me laugh so hard I choked on a scone. So I asked him gently, "Baby, what was I wearing on our actual first date?" And he goes, "Come on, you always looked amazing." I said, "No, I'm serious, what was I wearing?" He just kept smiling, like I was fishing for a compliment, the way you do when you want your partner to say something sweet. So I pulled out my phone. I still had the photo my coworker Camille took of us that day outside the coffee shop, the one where I'm mid-laugh and my eyeliner from 12 hours earlier is basically gone and my bun is half falling out. For some reason, I'd saved it all these years. He looked at it, looked at me, and his face just changed. Like, actually drained of color. He goes, "Wait, that was our first date?" I said, "Yes, that was the day we met. That was the coffee shop. That was the scone I choked on. That was us." He didn't say anything for a long time, just kept staring at the photo like it was going to rearrange itself into a different memory. Then he said, quiet, almost to himself, "So who was I thinking of?" And I told him it had to be some girl from his office happy hour, because that's the only other time period that fits the timeline he was describing. Turns out, and I only found this out because I made him actually think about it, sitting right there at the table while our food went cold, there was a coworker at his old job who left the company right after we started dating. Same build, similar hair, apparently wore a lot of makeup to the office because their dress code was corporate and she took client calls. He'd been telling this story at parties for years. At our wedding even. He told his best man this exact story before the toast. He'd been telling it thinking it was about me, and somewhere along the way the real memory of meeting me, looking like absolute garbage after a double shift, no makeup, hospital smell and all, got quietly replaced in his head with someone else. Because it made a better story. Because she looked so polished and put together sounds better in a toast than she smelled like a hospital and had mascara flakes under her eyes. And I bought her a coffee because she looked exhausted. I wasn't even mad exactly, not at first. I was just sitting there in this fancy restaurant realizing my husband built an entire foundational piece of our love story out of a woman who isn't me. A woman whose name he doesn't even remember. A woman who probably has no idea she's been living rent-free inside our anniversary dinners for 8 years. I didn't yell. I just said, "So you don't actually remember meeting me?" He looked like he'd swallowed his own tongue. He tried to grab my hand again and I pulled it back, not dramatically, just quietly, and set it in my lap. He spent the rest of dinner trying to fix it, kept saying, "It doesn't matter. I love you now. That's what matters. The details don't matter." But it did matter to me. For 8 years, I thought he loved me for showing up as my worst, most tired, unfiltered self. I thought that was our whole thing, our whole origin story, the thing I told my sister and my coworkers and even strangers at parties when they asked how we met. And it turns out he loved a memory of makeup and mascara that belonged to somebody else entirely. And I was just the woman who happened to be standing where that memory eventually landed. We paid the bill in silence. The waiter asked if we wanted the dessert we'd pre-ordered. This little molten cake thing with our initials piped on in chocolate, and I said no thank you. And Jason, that's my husband, just stared at the tablecloth. The car ride home was worse than the dinner. I kept the radio off on purpose. He tried to talk twice, and both times I just said, "Not yet," because if I opened my mouth, I was either going to cry or say something I couldn't take back. When we got home, I didn't sleep in our room. I told him I needed the guest room just for that night, and he didn't argue, which honestly made it worse. If he'd fought for it, I think I would have felt something other than this flat, hollow disappointment. I didn't sleep. I laid there scrolling through old photos on my phone, going all the way back to that first coffee shop picture, then forward through years of us, some camping trips, his cousin's wedding, the ugly Christmas sweater we bought as a joke, and then wore unironically for 3 years straight. And I kept asking myself the same question over and over. If he can misremember something that big, something that's supposed to be the foundation of us, what else has he rewritten in his head to make it sound better at parties? The next morning I made coffee for one. He came downstairs looking like he hadn't slept either, hair a mess, wearing the ugly Christmas sweater like some kind of peace offering, which almost made me laugh despite everything. He sat across from me at the kitchen island and said, "I want to know everything, the real version. Tell me the real version." So I did. I told him about the 12-hour shift, about the elderly patient I'd lost that morning before I even got to the coffee shop, about how I almost didn't stop for coffee at all because I just wanted to go home and cry in the shower. I told him how he made a joke about the barista's name tag that made me laugh for the first time all day, and how that laugh was the actual reason I gave him my number, not because of how I looked, but because of how he made me feel on the worst day I'd had in months. He put his head down on the counter and just said, said, "I'm an idiot," which, yeah, agreed, but it didn't fix anything yet. Over the next week, I did something a little unhinged, I'll admit it. I got curious about this mystery coworker, the one whose memory had apparently been quietly living in my husband's head for almost a decade. I asked him her name, and he genuinely couldn't remember it, which somehow made it worse, like she wasn't even a real person to him anymore, just a composite of makeup and confidence he'd slapped my face onto. I asked around, found an old company directory through a friend who still worked there, and found her, a woman named Renata. I didn't message her. I just looked at her LinkedIn photo for a long time, this total stranger who apparently shaped my husband's entire idea of what made him fall for me, and I felt this strange grief that had nothing to do with jealousy. It was more like mourning a version of our story I thought was true. Then came the part that really wrecked me. I mentioned all this to his mother, mostly to vent, and she got this look on her face, this guilty, cornered look, and said, "Oh, I always wondered about that story. It never quite matched what you told me." Turns out she'd noticed the inconsistency years ago. Noticed that Jason's version of how we met didn't line up with the version I told at Thanksgiving one year, the version with the hospital scrubs and the choking scone, but she never said anything, because she figured it was some cute inside joke between us, some exaggerated version he liked to tell for effect. She'd known, or at least suspected, and never once corrected him. That stung almost as much as the original confession. Everyone had been carrying a slightly wrong version of us, and nobody thought it was worth fixing. I told Jason I needed some space to think, and instead of panicking or begging, he actually gave it to me, which surprised me. He stayed at his brother's for 4 days. In that time, I did a lot of soul searching, cried in my car in a grocery store parking lot like a lunatic, called my sister twice at midnight, and genuinely, seriously considered whether this was a marriage I wanted to keep fighting for. Not because he cheated, not because anything dramatic like that happened, but because I realized how easy it is to build a life with someone on a story that isn't even true, and how long it can take before the cracks show. My best friend Marisol came over on day 2 with a bottle of wine and zero patience for my spiraling. She sat me down on the kitchen floor, because apparently we were floor people that week, and made me say out loud what I was actually afraid of. Not the makeup thing, not Renata, but the real fear underneath it, which was this. If he could rewrite the beginning of us without even noticing he was doing it, what was stopping him from rewriting the rest, quietly, one memory at a time, until the version of our marriage in his head had nothing to do with the one I was actually living? She didn't try to fix it or tell me I was overreacting, which is exactly what I needed. She just said, "Okay, so ask him that." Not the makeup question, that question. I sat with that for a long time after she left, going through old text threads on my phone, checking little details against my own memory the way you'd check a receipt, just to make sure I still trusted my own version of us. I found a few small things that didn't quite line up. Honestly, nothing as big as the first date, but enough to rattle me further. He always told people I proposed the idea of getting a dog first, when it was actually his idea, and I'd resisted for months because of our tiny apartment. He told his coworkers I picked our wedding song, when really I'd hated his first choice and we compromised on something neither of us originally wanted. Small things. Harmless on their own, but laid out together on my kitchen floor at 11 at night, they started to look like a pattern. Like a man who edits the story of his own life in real time to make himself the hero or the romantic lead, without ever asking whether the edited version was fair to the people who lived the real one alongside him. We ended up going to couples counseling, which neither of us had ever done before and honestly felt embarrassing to even schedule. In the first session, Jason told the whole story to the counselor, unprompted, including the part about Renata, including the part about the anniversary dinner going cold. The counselor, this calm older woman with a very good poker face, asked him one question that broke something open. She asked, "When you tell people how you met your wife, whose approval are you performing for?" And he just sat there. Eventually, he admitted that his dad had always been the type to comment on how women presented themselves, that growing up he'd absorbed this idea that a polished woman was a successful woman, a woman other men would respect him for choosing. He'd built our meeting into a story that made him look like he'd chosen well by his father's rulebook, even if it meant erasing the real version, the version where I was covered in hospital exhaustion and he simply liked me anyway. That session cracked something open in both of us. I realized I wasn't just angry about a misremembered date. I was angry because for 8 years I'd been quietly performing a slightly more polished version of myself around him too, wondering if the real me, the tired, makeup-free, hospital-smelling me, was ever actually enough. Turns out I'd been carrying my own version of his mistake the whole time, just internalized differently. In the second session, I brought up the dog thing and the wedding song thing, the little inconsistencies I'd found on the kitchen floor with Marisol, half expecting him to get defensive. He didn't. He just went quiet for a while, the way he does when he's actually thinking instead of just waiting for his turn to talk, and then said something that surprised me. He said he genuinely hadn't realized he was doing it, that in his head those stories had just slowly become the versions that felt better to tell, and that hearing me list them out loud, one after another, felt like being shown a slideshow of a stranger's highlight reel with his own face pasted over it. The counselor asked him to sit with that discomfort instead of apologizing his way out of it immediately, which he clearly wanted to do, and for once, he actually sat there in it instead of performing his way past it. I also had to admit some uncomfortable things in that room, that I'd known, somewhere in the back of my mind, that a few of his stories didn't quite match my memory, and I'd let them slide because correcting him felt petty. Felt like I'd be the wife who nitpicks the story at parties instead of laughing along. I realized I'd been trading small truths for social ease for years, the same way he had, just in a different direction. That was a hard thing to say out loud in front of a stranger with a notepad, but it needed saying. Things didn't fix themselves overnight, and I want to be honest about that because because I hate when these stories wrap up too neatly. There were weeks where we barely talked beyond logistics, who's picking up groceries, whose turn it is to walk the dog. There was one truly awful night where I said something cruel about Renata that I regret, comparing him to his father in a way I knew would hurt, and he slept on the couch and didn't speak to me for 2 full days. Marriage counseling is not a magic fix. It's just a room where you're forced to say true things out loud instead of letting them rot quietly. But slowly, things shifted. He started doing this thing where, unprompted, he'd bring up the real version of our story, correcting himself out loud in front of people, almost like exposure therapy. At his cousin's engagement party, someone asked how we met, and he said, "Actually, funny story, I used to tell it wrong for years," and told the real one, hospital scrubs and all, in front of a room full of people, including his dad. His dad made some comment about how that's not much of a story, and for the first time in 8 years, I watched Jason actually push back on him. Said something like, "It's a better story than the fake one, because it's the one where she chose me back even looking like hell." And I think that says more about both of us than any makeup ever could. I cried a little in the bathroom after that, the good kind of crying. We're okay now. Not perfect, not some fixed, glossy version of a marriage, but okay in the way that feels real, which is honestly better than the fake polished version we were running on before. Every anniversary now, we don't go to the fancy place with the cloth napkins anymore. We go back to that same coffee shop on 5th, the one that's somehow still there, still has the same slightly wobbly tables. I show up in whatever I've worn all day, no makeup, hair thrown up, sometimes literally straight from a shift if the schedule lines up that way, just to make the point. He orders the same scone every year, hands it to me and says, "Don't choke on this one." And I always do a little anyway, and he always laughs. Last year, he finally learned Renata's actual name, mostly because I told him, and he sent her a genuinely weird but kind message on LinkedIn, thanking her for existing in his memory long enough to teach him a lesson, which she apparently found hilarious and slightly alarming in equal measure. She wrote back one line, something like, "Glad my hair helped save a marriage I've never heard of," and honestly, that's the funniest response either of us could have hoped for. I like to think somewhere out there she has an equally strange story to tell at her own parties now, the one about a random woman's husband who apologized to her out of nowhere for a decade-old case of mistaken identity. We also started doing something small that's helped more than I expected. Once a month we sit down, just the two of us, and tell each other one true, unpolished memory from our life together. No editing, no making ourselves look better in the retelling. Sometimes it's embarrassing, like the time I cried at a Subway because they were out of the bread I wanted and he had to talk me down in the parking lot. Sometimes it's tender, like the version of our first date that started this whole mess. It sounds a little silly written out like this, but it's become the thing I actually look forward to most, more than the anniversary dinner ever was. I make him tell the real story every single year now, in front of whoever will listen. No makeup, no bun falling apart under fluorescent coffee shop lighting for effect, no polished version for his dad's approval, just me, exhausted and real, and a large coffee, and a man who finally remembers who actually chose him back on the worst day of her week. I never let him forget it again, and honestly, I don't think he wants me to.